Hi Tumnad lectures. In this video, we are going to be looking on what we call the cardiac conduction system. If you find this video helpful at the end of it, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Let's go ahead and get started. In this video, we are going to be looking on what we call cardiac conduction system. We are starting off series of lectures which are going to be dealing with what we call electrical activities of what we call of the heart. In this video, we are going to be mainly focusing on the basics of what we call cardiac conduction system. We need to first understand what is cardiac conduction system. Now, when we talk about cardiac conduction system, this is going to be a network of specialized type of the cells that are going to be working hand in hand to make sure that they release action potentials that will depolarize the entire myocardium to cause what we call the contraction of the heart. Okay? Now, these kind of the specialized cells, they exhibit a principle of what we call automaticity. Now, the question is, what is automaticity? Okay, we need to first understand what is what we call automaticity. Okay, so now what is automaticity? Automaticity is the intrinsic ability of the heart on its own to spontaneously depolarize, sending action potential throughout the entire myocardium to cause the heart muscles to contract, okay, on its own without any external influence, like for example, for the case of the effect with the nervous system, okay, it is that intrinsic ability on its own to spontaneously depolarize, sending action potentials that moves on entire heart muscles to cause them to contract. That is what we call the principle of what we call automaticity. Now, the question is, who sets that kind of the automaticity? Before we go into the detail of automaticity, I want to first cut a small piece of the myocardium. We try to zoom in out and see exactly the two categories of cells that make up what we call the myocardium. Okay? So now what we call the myocardium. Now this myocardium is going to be made up of two categories of cells. It's going to be made up of two categories of cells. What are the two categories of cells? The first category is what we call autorhythmic conducting cells. Okay, this first category is what we call autorhythmic conducting cells. And another beautiful kind of the name for these ones are also called the nodal cells. Okay, and then another category of cells are going to be what we call the contractile cells. Okay, another category is going to be what we call the contractile cells. Okay, so now we need to first go into the detail and look at what we call these kind of the categories of cells that make up what we call the myocardium. What is very beautiful is that the contractile cells, they constitute the biggest percentage of what we call the myocardium. They constitute approximately up to 99%, of what we call the myocardium is made up of what we call the contractile cells. These are the cells that are going to be contracting to make sure that they generate that extensive amount of the force which will push out the blood. Okay, so now these cells, they are going to be contracting. Okay, they are going to be contracting. And these kind of the cells, they are going to be constituting a number of different kind of what we call contractile proteins. What are some of these contractile proteins that are going to be part of what we call these contractile cells? They are going to be containing the following. They're going to be containing the thin filament, the thick filament, okay, which we call the myosin. They're going to be containing what we call the myosin. They're going to be containing what we call the actin. Okay, they're going to be containing proteins like tropomyosin. They're going to be containing proteins like troponin. Okay, troponin. They're going to be containing proteins like, for example, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, they're also going to be containing substances like, for example, the T-tube, okay, and even also going to be having that kind of the membrane that allows the passage of what we call the action potentials, which we call the sarcolemma. Okay, which we call the sarcolemma. So now those are some of the different kind of the proteins that are going to be making sure that they make sure they contract and then they push the blood. Now, when we come to what we call the autorhythmic conducting cells, or what we call the nodal cells, okay, these cells here, they don't contract. Okay, these cells here they do not contract. That is something which is so much beautiful to know. They don't contract. The purpose of these cells is that they automatically generate action potentials and then they conduct the action potentials. Okay, the main purpose is that they generate, they generate, they generate and conduct. They generate and conduct action potentials. Okay, action potentials. That is their main role. They don't contract. Now, an example of these autorhythmic cells, we are going to be having a couple of different these kind of the cells we are calling the nodal, or what we are calling the autorhythmic conducting cells. The following are examples of nodal cells. The first one is what we call the SA node, okay, or what we call the sinoatrial node. And then the second one is what we call the atrioventricular node, okay, the atrioventricular node. And the third one is what we call the bundle, is what we call the bundle of Higgs. Some people may call it the atrioventricular bundle. Okay, and then the fourth one is what we call the bundle branches. What we call the bundle branches. And when we talk about the bundle branches, here we are going to be having the right, and then we're going to be having also the left. And then the last kind of the example of this kind of the nodal cells is going to be what we call the Purkinje. It's going to be what we call the Purkinje fibers. Okay, the Purkinje fibers. So now these are the two categories of the cells that make up what we call the myocardium. Now these autorhythmic conducting cells, this one here, they constitute only and only 1%. Okay, on the entire myocardium, these autorhythmic conducting cells, they constitute only 1%, but the rest, 99%, is going to be the contractile cells. Okay, it is such another a beautiful thing. So now these kind of the autorhythmic cells, they are the one which are going to be generating that kind of the automaticity. Primarily what we are calling the SA node. This SA node is one which generates what we call that kind of the automaticity. It generates action potentials that can run on entire heart muscles to cause them to contract approximately 60 to 100 beats per minute, which is a normal sinus rhythm. And that is why this structure, which we are calling the SA node, is sometimes referred to as a pacemaker. Okay, is a natural pacemaker. We shall go into the detail and see exactly where these nodal cells, where they are going to be residing. Okay. So now that briefly covers the introductory part in what we call cardiac conduction system. We need to first take into attention on what we call the myocardium and see exactly what's going to be happening. So now in the next video, we are going to go ahead and see how these kind of the nodal cells, how are they going to be communicating to one another to make sure that they generate the action potentials, they send them down to the myocardium, and they cause what we call the contraction. Thank you very much for watching, and if you think whatever I've talked is making sense, is adding to you, you are benefiting, please, you can hit the like button, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. As always, Tumnad, until we meet next time.